Barbara, I'm so excited to talk to you today. You look absolutely beautiful. I love the backdrop. So thank you for talking to us. Um, you directed this this telling and chilling and very detailed, I will say, three-part docuseries, Epstein Shadow, Ghislaine Maxwell, which premiered on Peacock on June 24th. The doc details the story of Ghislaine from the very beginning, and how she ultimately ended up connecting to now deceased sex offender, billionaire, financier, Jeffrey Epstein. Um, it also goes into the disturbing details and accounts from victims that would ultimately lead to her arrest in July of last year. And just to be clear, she has maintained her innocence. She's in a Brooklyn jail. And let's dive right into this. Many people are already familiar with Jeffrey's story, right? But not very many people know the story of Ghislaine. Why was it important for you to tell the story from this vantage point?
Yes, exactly for that reason. I think he's been getting a lot of airtime.
Yeah.
When I was always interested in the fact that who's this woman that he literally called his best friend and who
Right.
spent almost 20 years with him. And we believe they met in the late 80s in England when her father was still alive, but she ended up moving to New York after the father died and living with Epstein and spending many years with him. So
Right.
to me, when allegations of this nature, sex abuse, sex trafficking, are associated with a man, unfortunately, that's what we come to expect when it's allegations of sexual, abuse and trafficking against women. But when there's a alleged woman involved, right, or the name comes up,
Right.
that was like, who's this, right? Now, to your point, she's only been charged, right? And she's innocent until proven guilty, 100%. But anybody who was any woman that was associated with him, after knowing what he's been involved with, that was worthy of investigation for us. And also, I knew a little bit about her backstory as a Maxwell, meaning they were a huge family in the UK, and they continue to be. And the father was a media magnate. Robert Maxwell was enormous, along the lines of a Rupert Murdoch. So right there, to my mind, her story is much more interesting. Her upbringing, much more interesting than Epstein's. Her background, much more fascinating. So there was a lot. It's just a meteor story. And I was fascinated that there was so little information out there about her, and that so many people, didn't even know her name until she was arrested.
Definitely.
Right? And so it's like, let's look at this story. Everyone's looking at Epstein. We need to be looking at who's this woman.
Definitely. Power and privilege are very much at play, right? Throughout this story.
Yeah.
But is the miscarriage of justice for the victims a bigger story to tap into? Let's say when the trial comes up in the fall, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the miscarriage of justice so far is with regards to Jeffrey Epstein, right? We don't know what's going to happen at this trial, and she's only been charged, right? To be fair. So this is an ongoing investigation, which is a tricky situation to be in as a filmmaker, right? If the case is closed, it's much easier. And I've been doing this for over 20 years as a director and producer, and focused on crime. So it's easier to go into a closed case. And document that. This is an open investigation. So we have to navigate that and be extremely fair.
Gotcha.
So, but in terms of the victims or the survivors at the center of this, this is absolutely part of Ghislaine's story. It wasn't the entire narrative. That's why we spent the first hour on her upbringing, right? Second hour is really her life with Epstein, which is when we get into the various survivors' voices, predominantly Maria Farmer, who plays a major part in our series, episode 2 and 3. And then episode 3 is more about Ghislaine on her own and where that led, and where her association with Epstein led to where she sits now. So of course, the victims and their plight and their situation is absolutely part of the narrative. It's just not the entire narrative. Right. And because we were looking at Ghislaine Maxwell as a whole, and the big story, and her evolution, and then her trajectory, and then her downfall, frankly. Right. So and of course that would include many of the victims' voices, and we did, and that's an important part of the story, but it's not the entire series.
Right, definitely. Barbara, talk to us about the interviews, because you secured for the doc over 200 people, but not everybody made the cut. I think 30 to 40 people or interviews made the cut. You even requested an interview with Ghislaine, but she objected. She wasn't interested. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? How did you go about reaching out to her, and what was her response back to you?
100%. Well, we spoke to, I would say, we didn't secure, we spoke to over 200 people. I've also been working on this for a number of years before it ever, I was developing this on my own with another producer 2 years ago, and 3 years ago on my own. So, I mean, it's been a long journey. So I have definitely, and the team, the research team, the story team together, we've spoken to over 200 people, and a lot of them on background. A lot of them didn't want to go on camera, but their information that they gave us definitely informed a lot of our story, right? So that was great. As far as the series is concerned, we have 30 interviews on camera. Many people didn't want to be interviewed. The most challenging part of doing this documentary was securing people for on-camera interviews, because the association, it's salacious, it's a tawdry subject. It's just, a lot of people are working, have careers, just don't want to be associated, whether they're friends with her still or not. And so it was tough. There's no question. With regards to Ghislaine, absolutely, we reached out to Ghislaine Maxwell early, pre-production last summer, and we went through her lawyer, and we never heard back. We did also reach out to most of the siblings that we could find, and one brother, Ian Maxwell, did get back to us and very politely said they're not interested in speaking. And that's fine. We expected that. But you have to do your due diligence. And of course, this is a story about Ghislaine Maxwell. So, you want the star of the show to feature the star of the show, right? So that was tricky. That's tricky in itself as a storyteller and a director. How are we going to make the audience feel that they know her and can get a sense of her without having her as an interview? Right. So that was tough, but we had enough footage, I think, that gives people a sense. And I think our contributors, many of whom who knew her, did a really good job of sort of coloring in the lines.
Definitely. You talked a little bit about her dad, Ghislaine's dad, media tycoon Robert Maxwell, and how he died, which ultimately led her to the relationship with, well, not, I wouldn't say it led her to, but it was her forming or her upbringing or her dynamic with her father that probably enticed her relationship with Jeffrey, I would say.
Yes, I think, listen, her father, her upbringing was very wealthy, always, wealthy, powerful father. And she was in his shadow. She was also his favorite. He was also a bully. So it was a difficult upbringing, but she learned at a very young age to navigate difficult and corrupt men. Right. So we did not, I want to make it very clear, we did not excuse Ghislaine. We're trying to explain, her story, so the audience can connect the dots and have more context in terms of understanding this woman, and where she led. So I think her upbringing, which I think we make very clear in the series, is the upbringing absolutely informed her choice in men, and her next major choice in men. She had other boyfriends, but was the primary one for almost 20 years was Jeffrey Epstein. And I think because she was so used to, like I said, navigating difficult, corrupt, somewhat despicable men, that was normalized behavior to her. So I think moving on to Epstein would not have been a shocker, put it
Right.
this way. I also think Ghislaine really was focused on aligning herself with power and wealth.
Mm-hmm.
And Jeffrey also provided that for her as well. And those things, as we discovered in the exhaustive research that we did, and a lot of the interviews we did, both on background and on screen, that this was very important, that wealth and power were extremely important to Ghislaine Maxwell, more so than maybe anything else.
Definitely. Barbara, what was your intention and hope? I know you've been working on this. I followed you for a long time. I'm a true crime fan. I'm all into it. So I followed you for a long time. What was your intention and hope when you set out to, because did it shift for you when Jeffrey committed suicide? Did the story change for you at that point? Talk to us a little bit about that and your intention and hope when you set out to put this story out.
It didn't change. I started working on this. I started working on a documentary about Jeffrey Epstein in 2016, before
Mhm.
his name was mainstream media, right? Like, no one knew this. And I heard about this guy that was arrested, this billionaire that was arrested for procuring an underage girl for sex. He was charged. He got a sweetheart deal. Okay.
Right.
I heard about this. It was big news in Palm Beach. It was not big news in mainstream media whatsoever.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So I'm like, what's that story about? And also, because I've done 20 years of crime, those stories are automatically, I'm fascinated by. And I'm
Right.
also fascinated by how very wealthy people get off and get sweetheart deals. It's the justice, the need for justice in me is just like, it just starts to rage. And so I was looking at that. I couldn't sell the show. I could not sell the show to any of the network execs. And when I pitched it, and I had talked to the lead detective, I had talked to all the lawyers, I had talked to some victims, I had talked some of the people that had worked for them. Like, I had a really good, list of people who would go on record to discuss this story. This is 2016, 2017.
Right.
No one would speak to me. None of the networks wanted it, and a lot of them had never heard of him.
Wow.
And the other thing is, because it was a case about sexual abuse and sex trafficking, very distasteful. They didn't like that. One exec literally told me it would be easier to greenlight a story about a murder than it would be about this subject matter. So I shelved it. So then I shelved it and moved on. But when he was arrested, right? My producing partner in New York, Michael McKinley, called me and said, weren't you working on a show? And I said, yes. But I said, forget him. Because I'd already done a lot of the research. I said, he's more interesting.
Wow.
So while all eyes were on Epstein before he died, right? The arrest and then the subsequent death, right? His name and his story is just blowing up. And also because of his death, a lot of the survivors felt more comfortable coming out, and I'm so glad in using their voices. And we just, that was just, I think that really had a lot to do with the need to, for the FBI and the justice system to get justice for these girls. I think that really was the impetus, is what I'm trying to say. But so kudos to the survivors, but I'm kind of going all over the place, sorry. But I think when everyone was focused on Jeffrey Epstein, to me, the more layered, complicated, and interesting aspect of that story was his so-called best friend, Ghislaine Maxwell.
Right. Wow. Elaine's trial is set for fall, like I mentioned at the beginning. How do you think this doc, for the viewers that have watched, will add or change people's minds about her?
That's such a good question, and we've been asked that a lot. Just I didn't set out to change anyone's mind about the trial or anything, and it's changed. It was supposed to be in July, now it's in November. So it's about really setting out to connect the dots for the audience about who this woman was. She was a mystery. She was an enigma. She was first in her father's shadow, then she was Epstein's shadow. Then as she tried to move away from Epstein, she tried to establish herself separate from him, right? In the last 10 years. And that didn't work out well, because, it was her connection to Epstein is what led to where she sits now. But I think as a storyteller and a documentary filmmaker, you have to present the facts or corroborate the on-air assertions. Anything that the contributors say, we had to back up with court documents,
Right.
Affidavits, depositions, sworn
Right.
testimony, right? That's why you see that so much in the show. And then it's presenting the story from beginning to where she sits now, and letting the audience decide what they think about her, and if it changes any opinions or if it doesn't change any opinions. That's not what we set out to do. I did not set out to change anyone's opinion one way or the other. I set out to present a comprehensive story where the audience could connect the dots about a woman who has really led most of her life in the shadows.
Right. Definitely. Definitely. Do you think that there would be as much interest in Ghislaine today if Jeffrey was still alive?
Great question. And I asked the same thing. I asked that actually to most of the interviews I did on camera, the lawyers and everything. I said, if he had died, would the justice system have gone after Ghislaine?
Right.
Hard to know. I think the state's attorney's office had a lot to, with the death of Epstein, I think the justice system didn't look good. Let's be honest.
Right.
So I don't know if that triggered anything. I'm not sure. But I think, because the victims, the survivors, I don't like calling them victims. These girls are amazing. Right. These survivors, there's such a need to give them justice and at least pursue it. Pursue an investigation that doesn't end in someone's death, frankly. Right. And so I'm not sure if Epstein's death was informed the situation with Ghislaine, right, but it's definitely something that I think a lot of people are asking. It's an ongoing investigation, so it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the trial and what comes out.
Are you going to be following? I know you're going to be following the trial. Documentary 2? Can we get another 3-part? Talk to us, Barbara. What can we expect? More to come?
I don't know yet. We'll see. If there is more to say, hopefully we'll say it. I'm not sure. I'm just really interested, as is the whole team, with what's going to come up in November.
Well, I'll be watching. I definitely want to know your point of view on this. So thank you so much again, Barbara.
Where is the buzz?
Oh, yeah. Where is the buzz? You said was mine.
Where is the buzz?
Ooh.